you happy for us to get started?
Thank you, Chair. We are now live.
Fantastic. Well, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to this February 2021 meeting of the Ealing Business Partnership. I'm Andrew Dakers, Chair of the EBP, and in my day job, I'm Chief Executive of West London Business. We're also joined this evening by my Vice Chair of the EBP, Cameron Mirza, a local businessman based in Ealing. By way of background, the Ealing Business Partnership, as the name implies, is a space for the local authority to come together with local business people, local business community, to share plans for the future and get the input of local businesses into that sort of forward plan. These days, the EBP tends to meet once a year with a particular focus on the budget setting and business rates process. But of course, alongside this forum, the local authority has many other spaces, perhaps most notably the business improvement districts across the borough that it uses to keep a conversation going all year round with the business community. After each agenda item this evening, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions. And on a practical note, you'll need to navigate your way to the participants icon, which is sort of at the bottom of the screen in Zoom. And when you click on the participants icon, which at the moment says 37 next to it, it will give you a full list of all the participants tonight. And at the bottom of that list, you'll find a raise hand icon. So I'll be inviting you to raise your hand when it comes to questions after each item, so that I know who to bring in. I'd ask everyone, as always in meetings like this, to please keep your contributions courteous. I appreciate there are many sensitive issues that will potentially be discussed this evening. I do ultimately have the power to remove attendees if needed, but I very much hope that wouldn't ever be needed. Bear in mind that officers and councillors, like I'm sure all of you in your own businesses, have spent the past 9 months working incredibly long hours, often weekends too, in response to the pandemic. And also bear in mind that whilst some of the issues that you'll be raising tonight are very clearly within the remit and responsibilities of local government and the council, there are also issues that we'll be discussing tonight, I'm sure, that actually rest on the shoulder of City Hall and central government to be addressing. Those issues are still useful for you to be raising because local councillors and officers in the council can take those issues and concerns forward in the representations that they make at a city and national level. So that's the sort of background, the sort of context for tonight. There are a few sort of formalities that I have to sort of go through now if I turn back to our agenda. The first is to check whether we have any apologies for absence. Have we been advised of any, Katie?
No, I haven't been advised of any apologies.
Okay. I've been advised in advance that we don't have any urgent matters. That's item 2. Item 3, do we have any declarations of interest from any of the sort of core members of the business partnership? I'm getting silence, so I'm going to assume that there and I haven't seen any hands up, so I'm going to assume that there aren't any declarations of interest to declare. Item 4, I've been advised that we don't have any matters to be considered in private tonight, which takes me on to item 5, the minutes of the meeting held last year on the 4th of February 2020. I think there are a small number of people, particularly a few councillors that were with us this time last year. Could I invite you to either raise any points of accuracy that need to be corrected with the minutes or advise that you'd like them to be approved?
Happy to agree them, Andrew. Councillor Bell here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Agreed.
So without further ado, we're going to move on to item 6, the budget strategy for 2021-22. My hope is this evening that in the sort of first of the 2 hours we've got together, that we'll be able to move through the budget strategy, and then item 7, the business rates update. So we've then got a full hour to hear about the economic recovery plans of the council and get all of your feedback on that. So I think we have Councillor Mahfouz and Ross Brown on the budget strategy. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and good evening, everybody. Nice to see some of your faces on Zoom, and obviously, sorry we can't be together in person. Appreciate it's been incredibly difficult last 9 to 10 months that you know we've all been through together, and we've got 2 presentations I'll kick off. This one is about the council tax and the medium-term financial strategy. And thank you to those who came to the December business engagement session that we did around this, and some of that feedback you'll see has gone into this. And then once we've Ross Brown, our Section 151 officer, our Chief Finance Officer, will go through the detail on this, and then we'll go on to business rates presentation a little bit later in the meeting. So I'm Bas Salmon. I'm the lead council portfolio holder for finance and leisure, and this is a run through of what we're going to be covering in this particular presentation. But I'll move on to the key messages, please, Shabana. So the key messages and takeaways from this year's budget, which we'll be proposing and has just gone live online as of last night, in terms of the detail of this, and will be presented to Cabinet later, in exactly a week's time, and then to full council in March, is that, as you'll be aware from those of you who have heard from me before, we've had that historic 64p in the cut in the pound of every 64p cut in every pound that we used to receive back in 2010. We now only get 36 pence, and the whole year has been a challenge, as it has been, I know, for you guys as well, in terms of the uncertainty of the financial standing that we were going to have as local authorities. So very much in a similar boat to yourselves as local businesses, and for the whole year asking government to fulfil their promise to pay their COVID bill. So they said up front, whatever you need to spend, we will cover. And actually, they hadn't kept to that promise, and so we spent the whole year effectively trying to hold their feet to the fire on that. When Rishi Sunak did stand up late last year in Parliament to announce what the funding would be for local authorities, within that, effectively, he was stating that we needed to, in order to cover the funds that he was talking about, he needed local authorities to increase council tax by the maximum amount, which is 0.01% shy of that 5% figure. And so you will see councils up and down the country passing on that council tax levy from Rishi onto local council taxpayers. With those feedback sessions that we did in December, we had a really, really clear message that you wanted us to prioritise and protect the most vulnerable. And that's something that I'm delighted to say that we've been able to do with the budget that we're putting forward. But it's also, as you would hope from us, that it's a budget of investment. So investment in new homes, and we're delivering 2,500 genuinely affordable homes as part of that commitment that we made just over 2 years ago. And we're also investing in our roads, pavements, recycling and leisure facilities as well. So in terms of trying to do the green thing, but also in terms of getting people back to use it, getting active on the other side of the worst of this crisis. So you'd expect, like any of yourselves as businesses, what had we been doing in the run up to this? So actually, in the run up to COVID, we'd done a lot of activities through what we call our Future Ealing programme, which had delivered significant savings over the past few years, and also at the same time as delivering savings, actually improved outcomes. So we've moved over for example, to our new Greener Ealing contract, which is an arm's length business that we've set up, council-owned company effectively that we've set up to take the running of our environmental services contract. We had obviously, over halfway to delivering our genuinely affordable homes target that I've talked about. You'll have seen, obviously, impacted by COVID, but the development and some of those already kicked off and then had to close again, the community managed libraries. We've moved more services online and obviously, like many of yourselves, had to deal with the new ways of working and working from home and so on. But we also were delivering really positive outcomes, both in terms of our better lives and supporting those with special educational needs as well. So those are really positive outcomes that we were able to deliver on and transform the way that we were operating in order to be as effective and efficient as possible as a local authority. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Ross Brown now, our Chief Finance Officer, who will go through with you our budget and medium-term financial strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mahfouz, and good evening all. As my introduction slide says, my name is Ross Brown. I'm the Council's Chief Finance Officer, or what's defined as the Section 151 Officer in law, so I have to advise members about the appropriateness of setting a balanced budget meeting our legal obligation. And obviously, as part of tonight's engagement, this is our formal consultation with the business community in our endeavour to set a balanced and sustainable budget for the Borough of Ealing. So I'm just going to start off on the next slide, please, with a little bit of context. What we've got in front of us here is quite a busy graph, but it's a helpful graphical representation of how the council currently, in this financial year, in 2021, as we're all aware, spends its overall budget. We talk quite a lot about the council's net revenue budget, but of course, when we gross up our overall revenue expenditure, as is shown on the purple circle within the graph here, you'll see it's pretty significant, standing at over £1 billion of expenditure in a single financial year. As you're aware, that's made up of a number of complex and ever-changing demands across a whole host of service areas, ranging, as it says up in the top left-hand side, from children's and schools for service, which includes both the direct provision for looked after and vulnerable children, through to the dedicated schools grant, which flow into the council, which we passport back to all the schools within the borough, right through to things such as place, as you'll see at the bottom of that graph, which covers a whole host of things right the way through from planning services through to the recycling services, street cleaning and litter collection, and the bins, of course. And that really does range through to our role and duty in terms of providing housing benefit subsidy support, which is actually the largest component of the Chief Exec's £274 million. So that housing benefit subsidy is what we get in from government and what we passport through to those residents that need that. So this graph is just really to show a little bit of context for those that are perhaps not as close to it as officers and members are, about the diversity and the types and the values of expenditure that we incur in a typical year. And that's our current composition in this financial year. Next slide, please. So where are we in this financial year? Well, as Councillor Mahfouz said very clearly, we've had a year of significant uncertainty. We think we've done very well and worked incredibly hard to respond to the pandemic in the way that councils are best placed to do so. That's come at significant cost to the council. As you would expect, there's a number of costs which materialise in that response that we've undertaken in the year. Our current estimate is in the region of in excess of £70 million of financial impact to the council. That covers a number of things. It covers the additional expenditure that we've had to incur providing those vital services to the residents of our borough and protecting the vulnerable, right the way through to our income loss and specifically the loss that we've seen in terms of a reduced amount from a council tax and a business rates collection point of view. We have had, as it says on the slides, funding through from government. That funding's come through in a number of tranches. There's been commitments made throughout the way. We think now that we will be in receipt of all of that funding that covers the vast majority, if not all, of those costs that we've incurred to date. Although we still have a delay in terms of some of that funding coming through in terms of the mechanisms by which that works. But we are hopeful that the lobbying has worked and that the council's voice has been heard. And we're certainly seeing further grant funding come through, and we're hopeful that we will receive the rest of the compensation via a sales fees and charges compensation mechanism, which is relatively complex and requires us to submit and have audited our returns before we receive those pressures. So at the moment, we feel as though we've got alongside that the sufficient level of mitigations in place that brings us very close to delivering an in-year balanced budget, as simply shown by the graphic to the right-hand side of the screen you're looking at now. Subject to the sales fees and charges income coming in, we may or may not need to use a level of reserves. We're hoping that we won't, but it's too early to tell at this current stage in time due to that mechanism. Next slide, please. So this shows the difference between the net budget requirements. So when we look at that gross figure of over £1 billion, what we are statutorily required to do is effectively convert that to what's called a net revenue budget. And the net revenue budget, as it says on the tin, is focused on the revenue expenditure as opposed to the capital expenditure. All the revenue implications of capital expenditure are by default contained in this net revenue budget, just by way of context. Our net revenue budget is comprised of the three components that we see there on screen, be it the retained business rates, so that's the element that we retain locally from an Ealing perspective, the council tax that we collect, and then the collection fund, which is effectively the rather complex accounting mechanism that actually covers the surplus and deficits that arise due to the differences between setting those relevant baselines and the actual cash that we collect. And you'll see that between the two financial years of this year and the forthcoming year, which is the budget we'll be setting hopefully with members' consent formally at the beginning of March, we see an increase which is predominantly driven due to council tax, and I'll come on to talk about some of the council tax assumptions that have been proposed by officers within this budget. Next slide, please. So one of the large components is the level of funding that we get from a government perspective. The provisional settlement was announced just before Christmas on the 17th of December. That is a provisional settlement. The final settlement figures are never known until March, so they typically come in just a little bit after the period which we formally set the budget, but we very, very rarely see any deviation from provisional through to final, but it's an important point to make. We've received some further funding, as is vital and necessary, particularly in the context of the longer term funding trajectory that Ealing's experienced over a prolonged period, which equated to about an additional circa £2 million from Ealing's perspective, and that was specifically to support children's and adult social care services. We had a number of helpful, albeit one-off announcements as well. There was some forward funding of COVID pressures for 21-22 on a single year basis, which, as I say, is helpful, but also makes it quite challenging for us to really try to get a grip and set a sustainable multi-year budget, which you'll see a little bit later on the slides that I've got. And just by way of context as well, we've had some deferrals of things that are really quite important to us, such as the baseline funding and the fair funding review, which are outstanding reviews which the government have been looking to undertake, which is meant to provide a future roadmap for financial settlement across all authorities within the country. That's been delayed, unfortunately, which makes some of our assessment about the medium term really quite tricky to do from a certainty perspective. Next slide, please. So moving on, the overall MTFS, or medium-term financial strategies, is a forward-looking 4-year business plan, effectively. As you will all be experiencing yourselves, unfortunately, there's a huge amount of uncertainty within the economy more widely. That manifests itself in a certain way for a local authority. We do have a backdrop of increased demand across a number of services, particularly within children's services across a wide variety of areas. We continue to be cautious of the impact of COVID-19 that affects us from an income and a fees and charges perspective, but also significantly from a new expenditure obligation meeting the needs of residents and the vulnerable where it's appropriate for us to do that. And obviously we've got a whole host of other uncertainties that sit around some more recent announcements, such as those funding mechanisms for councils that I touched on briefly. So we'll look in a minute at what that means in terms of a financial gap. And clearly one of the things that we need to do and that I need to advise members on is the level of reserves that it's prudent for a local authority with our risk exposure and our size and complexity to have. So within the overall budget report, I make a formal recommendation under my statutory role to hold a certain amount of reserves and a certain level of general fund balance to deal with those unforeseen challenges that can arise, as you would expect within the context of an expenditure budget that sits at over £1 billion per annum. Next slide, please. So what does an MTFS look like numerically? It looks at a very simple level like this table that you see in front of us. You will see that a very significant proportion of our expenditure budget is covered by the services expenditure line, which is around £189 million for 21-22. We also have a number of obligations where we have to pay various levies. We also have a significant capital programme, as you will hopefully all be aware, that makes a significant and positive impact right the way across the borough, and there is an associated revenue cost of doing that, and that's contained in the council's treasury management budget. The corporate items line is effectively us holding what is a built-in level of growth to help fund that net services expenditure, so that will all be allocated out as part of what we call the budget build requirement between now and the commencement of the new financial year on the 1st of April 21. That puts us in this instance with a reserves contribution, so that's a contribution to reserves about building that resilience to make sure we can deal with shocks and unforeseen circumstances coming forward at a level of around £256 million. And we are at a position where we can present to members with the officer recommendation of council tax and social care precept increase that we've now got a balanced budget in place for that financial year. Next slide, please. So on council tax, as I just said, the cabinet report going forward contains an officer recommendation to increase core council tax by 1.99%. The referendum limit is 2% itself, so my professional advice to members is to increase that by the maximum amount available to us to help pay for those essential services that we provide, as shown on that first graph, which we'll then see in a minute or two on the represented version of that for this forthcoming financial year. It's important to note, of course, that we intend to continue the flexible and generous council tax reduction scheme in 2021. We introduced, as you may be aware, a new council tax reduction scheme in the last financial year, which provides a much simplified and more transparent and user-friendly model for council tax support for those working age applicants that need that level of support. Unfortunately, and to an extent, inevitably, we have seen a significant increase in working age applicants come forward during the course of this pandemic. We've effectively seen an increase since the 1st of April of circa 3,000 claimants come forward during that period, and we project that pressure will continue to rise. And that pressure does typically have an impact on the council tax base, which is effectively a cost that's borne by council. We'd have received and will receive some further funding from central government to help deal with that council tax uptake for those people that are able to access the reduction scheme, and hopefully that will therefore manifest itself as a pressure in next financial year. Two more important points before I move on council tax. We have now formally introduced council tax relief for care leavers. This will entitle people that are up to the age of 25 that are classified within the definition of a care leaver to receive a full discount on their council tax where they are the liable individual for paying those bills. So that's another helpful step in providing essential support to care leavers. And we also now have the power to introduce an additional empty premium property where properties have been empty for over 10 years. And that very much is being used as one of the very many tools to increase the amount of properties available in the borough to address the housing challenge that we face, which we are very successfully dealing with through Broadway Living and Broadway Living registered provider, which Councillor Mahfouz has touched on, which we aim to deliver 2,500 genuinely affordable homes over the course of the next few years. Next slide, please. So an important component of balancing the budget every year is to ascertain what the budget gap looks like, both for the forthcoming year and future years, and to work as officers alongside cabinet and portfolio holders to develop a number of savings that help to shut that budget gap, effectively the differential between the expenditure obligations and the available income that we're aware of. In terms of this budget, as is set out in the cabinet paper, we are proposing a total of 11.3 million of general fund savings and cost avoidance savings. We're also, for completeness, including the savings from the HRA, which has been through a previous cabinet approved report, and also some savings from the digital programme, which is one of the transformation headers under what's called Modern Council, the Future Ealing, which looks at digital investment with a review to the payback of that investment and then future benefits going forward as well. So the papers do contain around £11.3 million of both general fund savings and cost avoidance, and they again have been very much targeted at the protection of the vulnerable and needy within the borough. So again, we've done that in a relatively sophisticated way to reduce or negate any negative impacts on those individuals. Next slide, please. So contained within the overall MTFS is a growth requirement to help fund those services that are experiencing significant demand pressure. Some of that demand pressure is kind of systemic pressure, which has been around for some times now, which we've tried to contain as far as possible, but it is clear that revenue growth will be needed to address some of that, and some of that is growth that's clearly arisen due to the current circumstances of COVID-19 and a higher throughput and through flow of individuals needing support of the council over the forthcoming year. It also covers some individual grant loss and some income which we don't feel will be achieved. So as part of the overall balanced budget requirement, we do use income from fees and charges to help deliver the overall balanced budget. And so the assessment of the level of growth stated here does take that into account. In terms of new capital investment, we are looking to invest in specific areas within the council. those areas at a headline level, if that's helpful, are a significant investment on a one-year basis for the highways, specifically the footways and the carriageways, which is about £5 million. Contributions for new gym equipment in terms of ensuring people live active and healthy lifestyles going forward of about £460,000. Contribution to disabled facilities grants being incepted around £480,000, and obviously we are continuing to invest in waste recycling and reduction work, which is part of the overall direction of travel for improved recycling rates. Okay, so the budget report overall contains, as I said, an officer recommendation to increase the council tax and social care precepts, as we've just touched on. That is worth around £7.2 million of income to the council, and within the Chancellor's announcement and the powers that he granted to local authorities as part of the provisional settlement, included in the 5% increase of core spending power was an assumption that local authorities would take the maximum council tax increase and social care precept flexibilities that were afforded to us as part of that provisional settlement. So the officer recommendation is consistent with the powers that have been granted and what is permissible as set out in the core spending review by the Chancellor. So that's my recommendation to members, to increase by those amounts, which will yield effectively £7.2 million of income for the authority. Next slide, please. So what does that look like? A very similar distribution, as you will see if you were to compare both the previous slide and this slide next to each other. We will have a gross revenue expenditure of just short of £1.1 billion. When we make those growth allocations, that will show the most material difference against children's and schools. And within the children's and schools headers in the top left-hand corner, it'll be that children's and families area that will be allocated the most material amount of that £14 million of growth allocation going forward. And it's fair to say that's where ours and many other boroughs like ours, most significant pressure is, both currently and projected to be going forward, although we're clearly aware that there are a plethora of different pressures that have and will continue to manifest themselves right away across the boroughs, including housing and homelessness challenges and rough sleepers challenges, and also what that means separately in terms of the adults and public health perspective is going to be continued challenges within the adult services area as well. Next slide, please. I won't read these out. These are some of the risks that we have to deal with and have to be aware of. Three of them, are touched on there under the demand-led header: children's, adults, and temporary accommodation. The second from the bottom is becoming significantly increased for us, which is the loss of income and the additional cost pressures as a result of COVID-19. We think we've factored some of that in. Obviously, it is very difficult given the stage that we are at as a nation currently as to how accurately and comprehensively we can do that. We have, as I say, taken that into account, and obviously we will have to monitor that very closely as we have continued to do in this year to make sure that we've got tight financial grip across the council and that we aren't using reserves to a level that's unsustainable going forward. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, from my officer perspective, we've got a proposed balanced budget with the officer recommended increases of 3% for social care precept. And just to be clear, that 3% social care precept is income that comes in that is then allocated directly back to social care as well. It doesn't go into other services. And a 1.99% increase from a council tax perspective, so a total of 4.99%. As it says there, we do have resource constraints. We expect to continue to operate in a very uncertain and a very tight environment going forward. We've shown good in-year grip this year, which has been incredibly challenging, but I think it's a challenging year that the council has met very well and provided some outstanding services in very difficult circumstances. And then longer term, as my final point there says, we do need to make sure that we can provide our services on a stable platform with a certain financial base. We would genuinely love to have further clarity on a medium term around the level of government funding and what we will and won't be able to retain going forward. There has been some support provided in the 21-22 financial year, but we don't know what that happens thereafter in 22-23. A lot of the funding and the announcements that have been made in the forthcoming year are genuinely one-off announcements as well. And the important context of that is it makes it very challenging for us longer term to come up with an appropriate and proportionate level of savings given some of the service challenges that we are facing. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross and Councillor Mahfouz. It's now, of course, open to questions from all the participants who've got joining us this evening. As I said at the start, if you click on the participants icon at the bottom of the screen, you will then find a raise hand icon. So please click on that so that I know to bring you in. You'll then need to obviously come off mute so that we can hear your question. And I'd like to take a few questions as a group for Ross and the councillors, so that we can sort of keep moving through the evening at a reasonable pace. If you are all overwhelmed by that volume of information and just reflecting on the implications for the council and indeed businesses and residents, household budgets as we look at council tax possibly going up. What we could do is move on to the next agenda item and then take sort of questions across both items together. As I'm not seeing any hands flying up at this point, I think we'll do just that. We'll move onto the item 7, business rates update from Nick Rowe and Councillor Mahfouz again, and then hopefully some questions will be bubbling away. So over to you again, Councillor.
Okay. Thanks again, Andrew, and thanks to Ross for going through all of that. I mean, it's we, alongside delivering the frontline work of COVID over these past few months and some of the major responsibilities we've had, we've also had to be trying to pull this budget together. So huge amount of work that's been has gone into it from a number of the team who are here as well.
And do stay with us, Ross, in case there are some questions in a bit.
Oh, of course, yeah. He's not going anywhere, don't worry.
Good.
I should have mentioned, actually, we've also got Councillor Julian Bell, of course, the council leader on the line, Councillor Dinter, who will be presenting to you later about the recovery, and we've also got Councillor Amajit Jamu just joining us in terms of, obviously she was the lead member for business and community for much of the year as well. So, sorry. Apologies, Jasper Anand. I'd got that wrong. Apologies, Jasper. Right, so business rate update. So if we move on to the next slide. So obviously, this is probably the bit that most businesses will be far more interested in terms of how this is going to impact on you over the next year. Want to take this moment to recognise, obviously, that you are a key element of the, obviously key to the Ealing economy. You are the Ealing economy. We've got 11,000 businesses paying business rates in Ealing, with over 17,000 total businesses in the borough. The 12th largest in terms of rates collectible in London, which is actually about mid-table, but actually the 20th in the whole of England. And in terms of, we massively appreciate that, there's been huge impact on businesses because of the COVID situation, and you've been, again, right there on the front line in terms of having to deal with unparalleled levels of uncertainty, both financially and from a sort of, from a managing your stock and everything else point of view as well. So we'll move on to the next slide. So COVID business grants. Initially, we received national recognition for distribution of those initial grants. So they were very simple in terms of depending on the type of business you were and your rateable value, you were entitled to X amount of pounds distributed to you. And we were the first. We flew out the doors, making sure that businesses up and down the borough receive those payments as quickly as possible. And in fact, we were at the top of the league table in terms of issuing those payments as quickly as possible. If that was simple, then what I'm going to show you on the next slide shows how things have changed massively in that period of time. But sorry, just before I go back, just go back a second, Shabana, just to say some of the volumes that we've done now in terms of business grants being issued out. So £93.7 million have now been issued to businesses. Further £59 million worth of awarded in reliefs for retail and in fact nurseries. So one of the groups that were seem to have been ignored by government centrally. And we've had now 10 different government grant schemes and with 17 periods for grant awards. And 2 relief schemes as well. So whilst we were straight out of the blocks, not only with the government scheme, but also putting in a specific local scheme right up front to try and cover some of those gaps. Since then, obviously, a lot of those goalposts keep on being moved, and you'll appreciate the sort of challenges we've had with government in terms of trying to get the funding as well. So if we move on to that next slide with that huge table. So this is where things stand as at the moment in terms of the total different types of grant schemes that are available for businesses. So if looking at it right now gives you a headache, you can imagine, I completely appreciate that for a start, because actually it's, there are so many different types of grants that are available now, some that you will need to apply for, others not, and so on and so forth. And so that is a challenge we appreciate for businesses. You'll also appreciate it's a challenge for our team at Ealing Council as well, in terms of making sure that they're all processed and that information gets out to you as effectively as possible, and that we can keep you updated as to where your money is, because I appreciate from your point of view, you want that money in your account as soon as possible, because for many of you, you may be living hand to mouth at the moment because of the current economic crisis, or having to have difficult conversations with staff, with those of you lucky enough to have staff around those sorts of scenarios as well. So so that sort of gives you an idea, but it also shows you where we are in terms of payments as well. So that's the last introductory slide from myself on this one. I'm going to hand over to Nick Rowe, who has been working day and night over the past few months to make sure that those payments have been got out, and that his team have been working day and night in order to do that. He's our Assistant Director for Local Tax and Accounts Receivable. I'll hand over to Nick to go through this particular slide deck. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, everyone, and we'll have a quick run through some of the business rate changes that are coming up in the next year or so, and then we'll obviously end back on grants and take any questions you may have at the end. So first bit of good news really is that the government have announced that the multipliers, which are used to calculate your business rates bills, won't be going up next year. Normally there's an inflationary increase, but they have announced that they will be set at the same level. And for those businesses who do pay the business rate supplement for Crossrail, which are the businesses over 70,000, again, that hasn't been announced. That hasn't gone up either, so that will still remain at 2p and a pound for those businesses. At the moment, there are no further relief changes announced for next year. Now, that currently includes the retail relief, which at the moment, as you know, all retail establishments are getting 100% retail relief. At the moment, that is set to be removed, but I'll come back to that in a minute. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So quick piece of information. I'm sure all of you are aware now that business rates demand notices, a lot of them are still set on 10 months, but we will switch to 12 months for anyone who has requested it. I know some businesses do still prefer to pay over the 10 months, but that option is there, and all new accounts are now being set to 12 months and all direct debit accounts. In terms of billing, the bills will be processed at the beginning of March and issued on or before, that should actually say the 15th of March 2021. We're hoping that we will get the budget announcements for the changes before we have to carry out our annual billing, which obviously means we can issue demand notices to reflect all the legislation at the time. In terms of the net collectible debit, quite interestingly, you can see on the slide there that the amount we've had to collect this year has dropped quite drastically from 163 million down to 110 million, and that's predominantly down to the 100% relief which has been given to retail properties. But equally, we can also see that the overall rateable value in the borough has also decreased from 385 million to 379 million over the course of the past 12 months. Next slide, please. Ross has already touched on this in terms of the business rates retention pooling. The London pool is set to end this year. So whereas previously we shared the risk of any losses with other boroughs, but also shared the burden of any gains from business rates yield, now we are back purely with an Ealing share, and our share being 30% of any money we collect through business rates. Okay, next slide, please. London living wage, I think I've probably attended this meeting for the last 4 or 5 years, and certainly this was a scheme we introduced, I think, in my first year at Ealing, and I'm pleased to say that in the budget report for this year, the recommendations going to members is that this scheme will be extended for a further year for all those people who are accredited with the Living Wage Foundation. There is a discount available for that. Okay, next slide. So in terms of government announcements, first thing I would say is that this year there was supposed to be a business rates revaluation. So all accounts would be getting a new rateable value, bills would change drastically, we would be having transitional relief schemes, but with COVID, the government decided to postpone that, and that's actually been now pushed back for 2 years. So that now won't take place until April 2023, and the AVD, which means is the antecedent valuation date, is the date that the values of the properties are based on, will be the 1st of April 2021. Now, obviously, it's not ideal to set that date during a pandemic, so keep an eye on that. I think the business community are already making representations to government that probably baselining rateable values on the 1st of April 2021 might not be the best time. The future relief, there is a scheme coming in, purely relief for public lavatories, and that should be coming in from the 1st of April 21. That has been proposed for a number of years. I talked earlier about the retail relief scheme, the fact that it was increased to 100% for 2021. At the moment for next year, the government's initial budget statement indicated there would be no relief at all for retail properties. Now, previously it was 33%, then 50%, etc. Interestingly, the Scottish government announced last Friday that they are introducing 100% relief for at least the first 3 months of the next financial year. Now, there's no word at all from our government whether for England that will be replicated or the relief will be extended at all. But again, keep an eye on the budget announcements, and obviously we would issue demands in accordance with whatever is stated in that budget. And again, the nursery relief, very similar. Scotland has again extended the nursery relief for 3 months for the start of next year as well. So we wait to see what the announcement for England will be. Next slide, please, Shabana. So in terms of the grant schemes, which Councillor Mahfouz showed you that incredibly complex slide where we've had to administer now 10 different grant schemes, 17 different periods of grant. Each scheme and even each period has had different qualifying criteria. It's been incredibly complicated for us. It's been very difficult, I know, for the business community. Some of the schemes we've been able to auto pay. For other schemes, the government have stated we had to have applications. We've been asked for even replications of the same grant scheme to go back to businesses and ask for additional information. So it has been an incredibly lengthy and drawn out process with the 17 different windows of payment. The good news is that as of today, all of the tier restrictions and national lockdown grants have now been paid, apart from the tier 4 period, which was the 20th of November to the 4th of January. And we're still waiting for confirmation from the government, both of funding levels and of the actual final guidance and regulations for that. But everything else has been paid. Ross and myself approved 12.2 million of third national lockdown grants, which were processed this morning. So payments should be going out to businesses and hitting bank accounts within the next 24 to 48 hours. And also further second national lockdown grant payments were made. And for those businesses in the leisure and hospitality sector, the tier 2 and tier 3 grants have also been paid. So I think as the initial earlier slide showed, that we've now issued 93.5 million. We will be reopening the application window for the second and third national lockdown grants. There was going to be a press release to be issued today on it, but I do understand it got delayed due to some of the COVID announcements, understandably, the council were making. So that will go live tomorrow at midday. The application window will be open until the 15th of February, which is the date that the current lockdown restrictions are due to be reviewed by the government. So that window will be open for 2 weeks, and it will be for businesses whose either their circumstances have changed from a previous application which may have been turned down, or those that missed the application window previously, and it now gives them the opportunity to get that in. On this window, businesses who have already received payments won't receive any further payments. The payments we have made and will be making tomorrow will cover the businesses up to the 15th of February. After the 15th of February, depending what the government announce, we are hoping we will then be able to auto pay to all businesses who have already received funding, and get those payments straight out again to people from there. Okay, that was all the slides I was going to go through. If anyone has any questions at all, or actually I'll hand back to Councillor Mahfouz or to Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. And as I said at the start of the meeting, a huge thank you to you and your team for the extended hours that you've had to work over the past 9 months, keeping these complex grants sort of flowing out to local businesses. Once again, I'm going to encourage everyone to click on that participants list icon, make use of the raise hands button if you'd like to put a question to Nick, to the councillors, or indeed Ross, who's still with us and presented at the start of the meeting on the broader budget strategy. Whilst folk are having a think and finding your way to the raise hand icon, 2 questions that I thought I'd put your way and sort of certainly sort of crop up in my conversations with local businesses sort of traveling around the area. One is sort of looking at the broader sort of strategy. You flagged that the sort of the business rates base has been dropping a bit, and I think that was something that was discussed at this meeting last year. To what extent are you finding that revenue from perhaps more housing in the borough is offsetting that revenue loss from the business rates base? Who would like to come back on that? Ross or Nick?
Ross, do you want me to take it? I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, you go first, Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, you're quite right. The business rates base has been dropping in terms of rateable value. That does tend to happen over the life of a valuation list, and this valuation list has been going longer than they normally would, and that's predominantly due to appeals. And as I'm sure all the businesses will be aware, the government introduced a new appeals process, check, challenge and appeal, which has been an incredibly lengthy process in terms of business rates appeals. So business rates income is going down. The council
We've lost you, Nick.
tax yield. So
you're chopping in and out, Nick. So I'm wondering whether Ross.
Oh, sorry.
Come in.
Let me turn my video off. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So the council tax base is continuing to increase, and I think that is assisting in the overall financial position.
So that erosion on the business rates is more a case of the appeal process sort of kicking in than the steady sort of loss of commercial floor space to residential, for example.
I would say there's an element of both, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Now I've got hands up from Barry Bassett and Steve Cunningham. So I'm going to take both of your questions together. First of all, Barry, though.
Hi, thank you very much. I applied for a hospitality grant before, and we're not in hospitality, but I run a company which is in the world of media, television. We rent cameras for TV industry, which completely stopped for 3 months. The reason why I asked the question is that we have 2 branches. One is in Bristol, and the Bristol branch automatically received a hospitality grant because they recognized that there could be no business for that period and we needed the help, and that was very welcome. I had applied for the discretionary grant twice and was turned down on both occasions. I wondered, you said that these are going to be reopening, and for those that have been unsuccessful before, will be able to apply again. Do I take it that it will be completely reappraised and that we might be in with an opportunity to be able to get some help, if not for a hospitality grant, but actually to have a business rates waiver as is available to some other companies which have been very badly hit and had to close down for a period?
Thank you, Barry. We'll pick up on that in just a moment. Steve Cunningham, do you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, good evening. I have a business rates query, but firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the council for all their hard work and support during a very difficult year. So as a local business owner, I've not been able to operate for almost a year, since March last year, but I don't qualify for any business rate relief, but retail businesses do. I'd just like to understand a bit more about why that is, and why is it that businesses that can't operate, like my own, still have to pay business rates. And the second part of that question is, you said how onerous it is to organise who is deserving of grants and to administer that whole system. So why is it that companies like my own have to pay the business rates, and then you have to figure out which proportion to give back? Would it not be better to or more efficient to just give some relief in the first place?
Steve, for context, can you give us a flavour of the sort of sector that you're operating in?
Yeah, it's an events management business, so I don't qualify for hospitality or retail relief, but events can't go on and haven't for a year, so effectively we can't operate.
And that's a familiar story across West London, that interconnectedness of the supply chain that both you and Barry are part of into what's perhaps more explicitly seen by government as hospitality. Anyway, Nick, Ross, do you want to come in, and then maybe some of the councillors have reflections too?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to take that. In fact, what I probably should have said during the presentation was yesterday we also approved the final piece in the jigsaw in terms of grants, which is the additional restrictions grant, which is the second discretionary grant. Now we've got 9.8 8 million to distribute in terms of these grant payments, and we would certainly aim to have to be addressing some of these businesses that may have missed out on earlier grants. I'm well aware, Steve, that the events management supply chain industry didn't fall into the qualifying criteria for a lot of these previous grant schemes, and certainly that is one we would be looking at. And rather than this time for the discretionary, rather than just have an overall discretionary pot, we're going to be breaking it down into a number of subsectors, which would include things like business pioneers, the aviation sector, the cultural sector, nursery support and COVID hardship. But the grants process for this will be focusing on those businesses that previously haven't received anything. So I certainly hope that this would be able to be targeted at businesses like your own. And also to Barry, I would say, Barry, I'll put my email address in the chat comments. So if you want to drop me an email on your particular business, I'll be more than happy to look into that for you as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. We've got some more hands going up. If I can ask you, if you've put your hand up and it's a legacy hand, please sort of take it down. I'm going to bring in John Nelson, then Baljet, and then Daniela. So John Nelson, first of all.
Well, first of all, can I thank you all for a great presentation, and it's very appreciated by the business community. I actually think that my questions have actually been already answered or asked by Barry. We again serve the hospitality industry, and we're also in exactly the same position. We supply ware washers, glass washers, dishwashers to pubs, clubs, and hotels, etc. So you can imagine the problem that we're encountering. And again, we've applied for grants, but we're still waiting for an answer as to whether it's been approved or not. But I think it may now have been answered. But can I just ask that question? Am I right in saying that you have answered it and that grants will be notified whether we're receiving grants in the next 48 hours?
Thank you. We'll hold that thought, and I'm going to bring in Baljet Sahota for our next question.
Yeah, evening. I think some of it's been covered already by the last few questions, but I just want to check. We own a coach company. We've been trading for nearly 50 years, and we provide transport to London Borough of Ealing schools, both like swimming and special needs. Now, every time we've called up, we've been told we're not eligible for grants, because it's available to hospitality and everything else. But business has done a 75% loss of trade because the coaches have just come to a complete standstill because there's no swimming for schools. Some of the schools are still closed. Special needs, they do operate, and we've got 1 or 2 routes going. But we are literally, as per other coach companies that provide transport to kids, struggling. So I was wondering, and I think it may have been answered, we've not applied ever, but will we be entitled to apply for that ARG grant?
Okay, and finally, I'm going to take a question from Daniela before going back to officers. Daniela Gluck.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I don't know how much I'm in a unique situation, but I didn't get a grant because I don't pay rates. But then, and I didn't know, I could not get hold of anyone in the council. I couldn't get any advice. And when everything had closed down, I finally found Sally. And Sally told me that had I known about it, I could have applied for a grant in the area where my warehouse is, where I store all my clothes. I make clothes for classical musicians. So I didn't get any help, partly because there was no one to give me any advice when I needed it. Now there's another grant coming that you say is opening tomorrow.
No.
Can I assume that if I apply for that, somebody is going to look at it and recognize that problems arose in the first instance and need to be sorted out?
Thank you, Daniela. And just to clarify, because you in fact gave me a bit of background on your case earlier in the day, Sally, who you referred to as Sally from Hounslow Chamber of Commerce, who I think is with us tonight, and has been giving advice to local businesses through the pandemic crisis. And your storage facilities, I think, are outside London Borough of Ealing, but your Ealing base is a home office, which of course is a familiar story for many businesses in Ealing. So I think a question there, particularly around home office based businesses and whether they might be eligible for ARG or any other grants. So a number of questions there, Nick, for you to pick up on.
Okay, right. Just to say at the start, I mean, I do understand and sympathise greatly with some of the the businesses who've been on today. All of these grants have had criteria set by central government, and we've had to apply those criteria to the letter of the law, including getting external relief from central government where applicable. Effectively, we can only pay on the businesses who qualify under the schemes, and I do sympathise that a lot of the events companies, supply chain businesses have missed out, and certainly they would be the people we're looking to target for the ARG. In terms, can I just clarify in terms of the application process? The applications that are reopening tomorrow are for the second and third national lockdowns. Okay, the ARG will be opening shortly. So tomorrow will be the second and third national lockdowns, of which the qualifying criteria remain unchanged, and that will be details on the application process about who can and who cannot qualify. So effectively, it's any business which has been forced to close by the government's legislation for the second or third national lockdown. Okay, ARG process will open again afterwards. In terms of businesses, we have on the first discretionary scheme, and I believe on this one as well, we are saying that businesses must have a business-related property expenditure on them. So that will either be a business property which they lease, or a space or location that they are paying rent or some form of property charge on. So that's the qualifying criteria. And I must reiterate as well that that business premises must be in the London Borough of Ealing.
And for absolute clarity, a home office does or doesn't count as a business?
Not if it's in a residential property.
So in Daniela's situation, we would recommend that she applies to Hounslow, if that's where the warehouse is, because that's where she
indeed. Yeah, and Hounslow will have exactly the same ARG scheme as we will be introducing as well.
So scan multiple boroughs and local authorities if you've got roots in different places.
Apply both and see what you. No, yeah. I mean, I think one of the this exactly sort of shows a number of the issues that clearly there is immense frustration, and understandably so, where you're not necessarily technically in the industry that the government has classified as being the most in need, but of course you are, because your whole supply chain provides everything for that industry. But we're going on the definitions that the government's provided. And then you've obviously got these windows that you have to apply within for goodness knows how many, like we're on lockdown number 3 and so on and so forth. So I would urge everybody, if you haven't already, please do sign up to the Ealing Council business email, which gets sent out regularly, and will notify you as soon as there is any changes or openings, as we've got tomorrow, with the application, anything that you need to apply for, or any new funding that's coming on stream. Otherwise, we'd all be effectively at sort of open university trying to keep on top of this. So these emails, and I know obviously Andrew, with what he does through West London Business and what his team does as well to try and keep everybody abreast of these things, but please do sign up to the council email. I'm delighted that we've got that ARG approved, got that all signed off yesterday. And that will be obviously rolling out very soon. And the key focus has been for me when I've spoken to Ross, Nick, and the team, is really about trying to use that funding to plug those gaps. And unfortunately, there are probably more gaps than there is funding, sadly, but we're trying to do as much as we can in terms of plugging all of those gaps with the finite funding that we're being provided. So please, as I say, sign up to that email address. I don't think I've got it on this particular laptop, but I think perhaps Nick or Ross, if you would be able to put it in the chat box as to the hyperlink, for people to sign up to that. Let's do that later this evening.
Thank you,
I'll
Councillor.
put that there.
And just one last question we've had in the chat window. I think a sort of point of clarification from Andrea Leafy. Can we? When will the criteria for the ARG be in the public domain and shared?
So I believe it's already available in terms of the type. So as part of the individual cabinet member decision I took yesterday, it's been published on the website. Probably not the easiest thing to find. To be fair, but we will. I guess, Nick, have we got an idea from the web team as to when that will go online at the moment in terms of the criteria and the application status?
I would expect it to be application process. I'm meeting with Connor tomorrow to discuss the application, but yeah, we would hope to be able to get some details out, hopefully by the end of this week, with the application process to go live next week.
Yeah. So again, the hyperlink that Nick's going to send you, but also perhaps, Nick, if we could just send the hyperlink to the business support page, because that's, I assume that'll be the page where we update it to show the new information as it goes live. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you. Well, without further ado, we're going to move on to our last item of the evening, but again, another significant topic that perhaps helps us look forward to a future beyond COVID, the Council's economic recovery strategy. And for that, we have Councillor Dinser with us, I think also joined by Connor in a presentation. So Councillor Dinser, welcome.
Thank you very much. Can somebody put the slides up, please?
Have a brief pause whilst the slides are shared.
Oh dear.
Can I have verbal confirmation? Oh, brilliant. We're going to screen share now. Over to you, Councillor.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Kamaljeet Dinser, and you will be glad to know that I'll be doing a very short presentation about economic recovery. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Apologies, Councillor Dinser, my laptop's very slow at reacting here. Just a bit of patience might be required by people here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to spend a few minutes giving you a quick run through on Council's Green Print to Economic Recovery. We are very excited to have produced this draft document. It has been circulated to you, and if you haven't had time to read it yet, please do. It's not a very long document. It's only about 15 pages, and we have made it short and concise. We hope it gives you an indication of how we want to approach economic growth, our focus and priorities within short, medium, and long term. We want to hear your feedback and capture your input regarding the document's content. That's why it's still considered a draft document. We are consulting with many businesses and business organizations to get their input, which is very important to us. So your input matters. Next slide, please. The green print explains how economic growth in Ealing could be achieved in a way that is sustainable, where climate action, inclusion, and social justice are at the heart of our economic recovery. The green print should be viewed as a simple and deliverable plan that can help underpin a future economic growth strategy. Next slide, please. The green print focuses on 4 action areas: so climate action, residents, businesses, and neighborhoods. Each action area has an overarching green print goal, 3 objectives for delivery. So there are 12 objectives across the 4 action areas. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through all the 4 action areas, but I will highlight the one supporting business action area, given the audience for this evening, which I assume is predominantly businesses. That is not to say the other areas are not important, but it's just to draw your attention to this one as an example. We want to ensure our local businesses are able to receive the right support and information so they can respond to challenges, grow, and be more resilient. We also want to ensure our borough can attract new business growth, businesses that want to invest in our borough, create wealth and employment opportunity for our residents. The business action area has 3 objectives, as I mentioned. The first one, supporting business survival and adaptation. Second one, enhance supply chain networks and creating more business-to-business opportunity. And the third one, develop an inward investment. Next slide, please. We can only achieve our goals and objectives by working in partnership with all the stakeholders. In some areas, we have started to put in place partnership structures to deliver against some of the actions and objectives. For example, we have set up a stakeholder group, Ealing High Street Task Force, which is one of the objectives of supporting business action areas. The task group has brought together key officers from across multiple council services and teams, along with key external partners, including the business improvement districts, trader associations, landlords, and operators to develop a high street action plan. This approach to objective setting was critical in order to reinforce the importance of partnership working internally and externally, and for sharing responsibility and resources for delivery. To echo the words of Councillor Bell, as he mentioned in his 4 words to the green print, if we get our approach to recovery and renewal right, everyone should have the chance to thrive and flourish as we emerge from the crisis. Let us proceed together with a great sense of purpose and resilience to achieve that. Thank you. Next slide, please. We very much, like I said previously, we very much want to hear from you. So please do share your feedback with us by emailing us on regeneration@ealing.gov.uk. Your views matter. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just wondering whether we can reverse the slides a bit, just to pause on the kind of the table that sort of summarise the sort of work programme bit, just so that everyone can sort of anyone that didn't get a chance to soak up the detail can do so. Whilst we sort of reflect on that and the sort of the optimistic, sort of positive plans for the months, years ahead, an opportunity again for everyone to sort of come in with questions and reflections on where you all would like the council to be focusing sort of finite resources in supporting business moving forward. Baljit, I don't know whether that's a legacy hand or you've just put your hand up again, but I was keen to have a variety of questions to come in at this point. Also, if Connor and or Carol, I think Carol, you're having some audio problems. If you want to come in too at this point, maybe to expand a bit on sort of business support plans, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor Dinsmore, and thank you, Chair, for allowing us to present here this evening. For everybody's benefit, I'm trying to turn my video on, but it won't let me. I'm having a bit of a technical nightmare here. But my name is Conor McDonough. I'm the Director for Economic Growth, and Carl works closely with me in the Economic Growth Service. So it's the Economic Growth Service that has been coordinating this short-term plan for the councils or the boroughs' economic recovery and renewal. And the green print that Councillor Dins has just outlined here is a draft document, as he said, and it's very much a document that we seek to stress test with a number of partners. And obviously tonight we've got business colleagues on the call that we hope to get some feedback on. I will be presenting this document to various other cohorts of people and groups, such as our climate action folk across the borough, and I'm sure some people on the call are aware that we had our climate action strategy endorsed at Cabinet last Tuesday, led by Councillor Anand. And we're obviously having various conversations with many of our residents, and we're having conversations with many of our various neighbourhoods across the borough, in particular through our High Streaks Task Force. So we're reaching out to neighbourhoods like Southall, North Acton, Greenford, the whole raft of neighbourhoods across the borough. It's ultimately the green print that has been presented here. It will be finessed and refined further as we get feedback, and will likely go to Cabinet in the summer for final endorsement. And then I'll underpin what would be Ealing's economic growth strategy, title to be confirmed, but something of that ilk. And the economic growth strategy will be a much more comprehensive and extensive piece of work. It would have to be developed, co-drafted with businesses, residents, and many other stakeholders to set that long-term vision for growth over the next decade or more, to ensure that our economy becomes more resilient and becomes more diverse. And if there is any future economic shocks like this, let's touch wood that there won't be, then at least we'll be in a better place to, withstand that strain and recover. So this green print really sets the platform for that. So yeah, I'm happy to take any, or myself and Carl, and obviously Councillor Dins is on the call, and we're happy to take any questions you might have, particularly around the supporting business objectives. If you feel that they're right, or you feel that there should be more, or we're missing anything obvious here, we're keen to get your feedback. I'll stop there and hand back to you, Andrew.
Thank you. We have a quick Chair, come in, please. My hand gesture's not working. Goodness, the raise hand button is failing us. So, Councillor Anand, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to endorse my colleagues who have been speaking about the climate and ecology emergency strategy that went to Cabinet last month. I just want everybody to be able to read this strategy. It's a great document, and it really shows that we all need to work together to make that change and get to our goals. And it's basically recognizes the importance of the community's role in achieving the aim of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. All our residents, businesses and public sector partners such as schools and health services are vital to this journey. I would like to ask the High Street Task Group to please note the strategy in one of their meetings and be able to discuss it in detail. And if there are any recommendations or any support they can give us through this strategy, we would really welcome that. And thank you, Chair. Sorry, my hand gesture's not working, and I just had to type that in the chat. But thank you for allowing me to speak.
No, thank you for that. And I wonder whether you or an officer might be able to share the link to the climate strategy which has been published in the chat window for easy access for anyone that hasn't yet had a chance to soak up that plan. And I wonder if we should bring Connor sort of back in. I wonder whether you could share a bit around this sort of bullet point on enhancing supply chain networks and business-to-business opportunities, and perhaps give us a flavour of some of the thinking that's emerging there from the council.
Sure, I'll attempt to do that, Andrew, and perhaps if Carl is sorted her technical issues out, she might want to come in on that, because that's something that herself and her team are very much focusing on at the moment. Yes, so behind these 4 action areas, we've got a delivery plan. I don't have the delivery plan in the presentation. In fact, I might be able to share it here. Can you see that screen? Or is that a different?
We can.
Can you, does it say Part C on it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I've just actually uploaded the green print document itself. So here you can see there's a more detailed delivery plan that sits behind each action area. This is the supporting business delivery plan. So you can see here that there's the 3 objectives across the top: supporting business survival and adaptation, enhanced supply chain networks, and refreshing our inward investment program. And then you can see along the left-hand side about how we're seeking to do a lot of work within the short term. So this is very much a document that is dealing with the here and now, because we're obviously still in the grip of the pandemic, 3rd lockdown, businesses suffering serious hardship and suffering lots of different things at the moment. So we want to be acting as quickly as we can here. So that enhancing the supply chain networks column here, you can see over the next 6 months, we will be implementing some learning from our recent Fit to Bid pilot, which hopefully some businesses on the call have been involved in. I know that Sally from the Chambers was involved in that as well. And it's about how we're collecting more data and intelligence from key partners such as Heathrow Airport, and obviously yourself, Andrew, through your West London business. So a key thing for us at the council is to collect that data, because with that data, then that allows us to identify those businesses and those particular supply chain networks that we can be targeting. And going back to some of the comments that Nick made earlier about how we can be more sophisticated in terms of our targeting of those businesses that missed out on the first grants. So that's very much a work in progress at the moment, and we're working very closely with Ross and Nick and the wider finance team to ensure that happens. And then you can see after that, so in the next 6 to 12 month period, you can see that we're again hopefully formalizing those partnerships with local businesses. So we're building them at the moment, but we hope to enter into more formal arrangements with some local business and our anchor institutions. For example, only last week or 2 weeks ago, myself and the chief exec had a very interesting meeting with West London College and University of West London to see how their own recovery programs can actually interface with the green print and see what role they can play in assisting with upskilling and reskilling some of the folk that were linked to the Heathrow supply chain network, for example. So that's possibly a partnership that could be formalized, and we'd like to get businesses to be part of that as well. And then moving on to the more longer term part of this very short term plan, so the 12-month plus period, we hope to be working closely with colleagues across the council, in particular our procurement colleagues, to see if we can finesse or refine policies around procurement to allow our local businesses within Ealing, particularly those that are suffering most hardship at the moment and will seek to recover as much of their losses as possible, to access some of the opportunities within the borough and within the wider supply chain networks that span across not just Ealing but the whole sub-region. And again, it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that this green print plugs well into the West London Alliance's recovery strategy as well, the build and recovery plan, which I can share the link on as well, which people aren't aware of that. And we're obviously very closely engaged with the Mayor of London's recovery work as well, his various work streams on that. So this green print very much sits within that wider ecosystem of recovery, and supply chain networks is a key component of that, Andrew.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. And as I think was mentioned sort of earlier in tonight's meeting, I assume getting onto the council's sort of business email list is the sort of first step if businesses aren't currently hearing about these opportunities, sort of direct into their inbox. Important to get signed up. Now,
yes, I would say it's compulsory for all businesses to sign up for that.
Right, very clear message there. Thank you. Now, I haven't seen any more hands go up. I know that there've been some bits of discussions ongoing in the chat window. It has been quite a long-ish meeting in a sort of in what's already been, I think, a busy and perhaps tiring start to the year for everyone. So I don't want to draw the meeting out any longer than needed. I think a few email addresses have been shared, so I think if anyone has follow-up questions off the back of tonight, please either go directly to the officers or indeed my email address. I think it's is in the public domain on the Ealing Business Partnership webpage on the council website. So do please feel free to channel sort of questions through me if needed too. But I think for now it just falls to me to say thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Great to see such a turnout, and really best wishes. Stay safe, stay healthy in these difficult times, and let us all hope that in not too many weeks' time we'll be coming out of lockdown and find ourselves in a better position to rebuild all of our local firms. Thank you.